people who talk about self-control or self-discipline take a pretty military or suck-it-up approach. But because I'm a PhD psychologist, I know that that approach does not work for the vast majority of people. So today I'm going to tell you about 2 strategies that can help you increase your self-control based on studies, and that are actually pretty easy to implement. And you can apply these self-control gains to just about anything you want, from stopping impulsive eating, eating healthier, being more productive and less distracted, working out more, or just about any good habit you want to make or bad habit you want to break. Hey there, I'm Mish, and I am a full-time researcher with my PhD, and by day I run and publish studies of my own, and by night I share the results of other people's studies here to help you reach your weight loss, fitness, health, and nutrition goals. And today I'll be talking about self-control because it is so central to pretty much every aspect of health and mental health and weight loss and fitness. So cultivating good self-control is absolutely key to being able to make good habits and break bad habits. I actually got inspired to make this video because I've been on a productivity kick for like a year. I'm just trying to increase my productivity as much as possible so I can continue to have my full-time job plus infinite hobbies. And I stumbled across this self-control literature, which can really help with productivity and focus, but it also is really helpful for weight loss and fitness, which is most of what I talk about here. So I thought you all would be interested in hearing these self-control increasing strategies, and I'll be mostly couching them in terms of weight loss, impulsive eating, working out, eating healthy, that kind of thing, but really it can apply to any discipline in your life that you want to establish or any habits you want to make or break. Each of the strategies I'm going to tell you about today address a different type of self-control. So first I'm going to talk about the type of self-control that's most important for breaking bad habits. So I'm going to talk about a strategy that will help you improve that. And then I'm going to tell you about a strategy that will help you develop the type of self-control needed to establish good habits. And first, for the type of self-control that is required to break bad habits, the reason we fall into bad habits is largely related to dopamine. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter in our brain that is responsible for all sorts of things, but for the purposes of this video, we'll focus on its key role in reward. So our brain is constantly craving dopamine, and luckily we can get dopamine hits from things like achieving goals and doing happy, fulfilling things that are good for us. But unfortunately, all sorts of unwanted behaviors also lead to huge dopamine spikes. And one of the clearest examples is cigarettes. So when you have a cigarette, it leads to a big increase in dopamine. So you got a big spike, and then after the cigarette, it falls, and as it continues to fall, you start to get this intense craving for another cigarette. And there are all sorts of behaviors that do this. So for example, with impulsive eating, if you have low dopamine, whether it's from being stressed, working too much, having a negative thought, pretty much anything, your brain starts craving a hit of dopamine. And one way that people satisfy that craving is to go impulsively grab some food. And the more times you do that, the more hardwired it is that your brain will immediately expect to be given a big hit of dopamine from food as soon as it has any sort of low dopamine situation. Another place this shows up a lot is when you're trying to work. If you get a moment of boredom when you're trying to focus, or you're just really tired of focusing on that task and your brain gets all restless, you will generally, or most people will at least, take out your phone to try to get a hit of dopamine from social media or reading texts or anything that's interesting and exciting and rewarding. And the first strategy I'm about to tell you will help you deal with getting rid of these kinds of behaviors in a way that I bet you've never heard of or thought of before. But first, for some background, studies show that self-control is like a muscle. So when you use it, you actually get weaker and you run out of self-control for a little while. Usually this is talked about over the span of a few hours or a day. So if you have to do a lot of self-control exerting tasks throughout the day, you'll have a lot harder time exerting self-control later in the day. So for example, let's say you're at work and you have a really annoying coworker or client and you have to spend all day keeping your cool and not exploding at them, exercising a lot of self-control. Then when you get home at night, you're way more likely to give in to eating that chocolate cake even though you're not hungry and are trying to avoid added sugars or something like that. So you're more likely to have self-control failures after having to exert a lot of self-control because it's like a muscle that gets weak. But thankfully, the muscle metaphor doesn't stop there because there are some studies showing that you can actually train your self-control just like a muscle. So where lifting improves your physical muscles, practicing self-control actually improves your self-control muscle, essentially. So you end up with a higher capacity and a better ability to exert self-control on your behavior. So you can literally work out your self-control or self-discipline and get better at it. And for a little mini tip on the way here, studies suggest that the resource, or one of the resources underlying our self-control capacity, is actually blood sugar. So it's been shown that when people have higher blood sugar, they can exert self-control better. And then when their blood sugar gets low, they have a lot more trouble exerting self-control. So this kind of suggests that eating a higher carb diet might actually be good for self-control. Just a little aside there. I have more details on this in a very old throwback video up here. So now for our first strategy. This is primarily for if you are trying to resist unwanted behaviors like eating impulsively, saying impulsive things that you regret, getting distracted while working, any sort of bad substance habit. Obviously, severe substance abuse needs to be brought to a professional, but for mild things and mild behavioral addictions, this should help. And for a caveat first, if you are eating in response to actual hunger, that is not impulsive eating. If you have physiological hunger signals telling you that you need calories, like a grumbling stomach or feeling weak, then you should definitely eat, and you should not use self-control to resist eating there. When I'm talking about impulsive eating, I mean eating when you are not hungry or just having a mind appetite, essentially, not actually a physiological hunger appetite. Then it's worth using self-control to not eat when you are not hungry. Or it's useful to use self-control to resist eating foods that you're really trying to avoid eating for ethical reasons or health reasons. So the first step is to pay attention to what causes you to want to eat impulsively. What kinds of thoughts or feelings precede it? I've found in myself and a lot of people I've talked to that it's often a general feeling of restlessness or discomfort or just kind of feeling out of sorts is kind of a low dopamine cue. You just need something to satisfy this kind of sudden craving. So the first step is to identify what kinds of thoughts and mood states and physiological states precede the unwanted behavior that you are trying to extinguish. And then for step 2, find other behaviors that are not as important as the main behavior you're trying to extinguish that elicit the same feelings before it happens. So for example, let's say you're someone who impulsively eats in response to a negative thought. So you get an uncomfortable thought, you have a stressful thought of something you're procrastinating on, or something that causes a negative mood state. Your usual response might be to reach for food. But I imagine other times you might have a different response or an additional response, like reaching for social media to distract yourself. So if your big goal is to stop impulsively eating in response to those thoughts, then step 1 is actually to try to practice stopping checking social media in response to that feeling. And it's important to identify another behavior that comes in response to a similar feeling, because it'll help condition your brain to stop expecting an immediate relief right after you experience that negative feeling. So instead of always immediately getting some hit of dopamine from food or distraction or something else in response to a negative thought, you learn to just sit with it and breathe deeply, or think of something you're grateful for, or think of something you're looking forward to, or go for a quick walk or stretch or anything else to give you a much milder dose of dopamine in a much more productive way than some kind of compulsive behavior. And there are a lot of other compulsive behavior options you could choose from that a lot of people experience. So for example, picking at your hair, picking at your eyelashes or eyebrows, cracking your joints, fidgeting. All sorts of compulsive behaviors can qualify as other behaviors you can try to target and reduce doing in order to eventually have that self-control gain transfer over to the big behavior you really want to stop. For a personal example of this, I am trying to stop going down Google rabbit holes when I'm trying to work, especially because I have this habit whenever I get really stressed about a big deadline coming or think about something anxiety-inducing. I will often just go information seeking because I am a compulsive researcher. It's literally my job, but unfortunately when I deploy it to look through knitting patterns for 15 minutes when I'm trying to work, it's not a good habit. Not that bad, obviously, but still. So I'm trying to break that habit. And so my first step for trying to break the habit of going on information seeking adventures when I'm trying to work is to stop cracking my joints, because in response to those same anxiety-provoking or stress-inducing or negative thoughts, I will often crack my fingers, is something I notice. So by targeting the finger cracking, I am choosing an easy behavior that I don't have strong feelings about one way or another. Like I'm not gonna be really sad if I fail to stop cracking my fingers sometimes. But by choosing this behavior, I am practicing in an easier setting so I can transfer that self-control gain to the thing that actually matters, which is to stop getting distracted while working. And choosing a low-stakes behavior is important because you will fail sometimes and you need to be okay with that. So if you fail at not cracking your fingers, it's not like you're going to be that upset compared to if you fail at getting distracted or impulsively eating. So the goal is to choose something where it won't be that upsetting if you fail and you'll keep trying and not give up, but it also is similar enough in terms of what it comes in response to the behavior you're actually trying to target. And the similarities between self-control and muscles continue to be very useful. So if you are trying to get stronger and you are starting very weak, you do not want to go try to do a pull-up immediately because it will be completely useless. You will just hang there, unable to do anything, and it won't even increase your muscle strength really. So it's known that if you are trying to do a pull-up and you're not able to yet, you're supposed to build up to it. So first you might start with like lateral pull downs, and then you might do assisted pull-ups, and then finally try a real pull-up. But if you went straight to a real pull-up, it would be not only demotivating, but you just wouldn't really get anything out of it because it's not actually working the muscles. Whereas if you start with easier exercises that can help build up the muscles that are needed to eventually do pull-ups, then that's how you get there. And it's just the same thing with self-control. You want to start with easier behaviors and gradually build up in difficulty until you get to the really big, hard behavior. So you might start with not cracking your fingers, and then not checking your phone, and then try to not impulsively eat in response to these things. And I just want to remind you that because self-control is a limited resource and it does get depleted when you exercise it, you might find that the first few days are pretty frustrating as your self-control keeps getting depleted. But eventually, even over the course of a week or two, you should get more self-control and it won't feel so hard and it won't mess up your later self-control. So stick with it, find something that's low stakes that won't frustrate you, and by doing these easy behaviors, you might actually find that they make it easier to not impulsively eat, even without trying to not impulsively eat, because you'll be breaking that conditioning that your brain has that it gets a hit of dopamine every time it has a negative feeling or a slight craving. So if you keep breaking that conditioning over time with something easy like cracking knuckles, then it should transfer to impulsive eating even before you officially start to try tackling impulsive eating. And if you really have trouble identifying whatever is preceding the unwanted behavior, another way is to ask yourself whenever you're doing an activity that was not planned, why am I doing this? Why did I start doing this? What's the goal here? If you find you're just scrolling endlessly through TikTok and you don't know how you got there, that strongly suggests that that behavior was in response to something like boredom or a negative feeling or something impulsive. So that suggests that it's an impulsive thing that could be a target for practicing self-control. The second strategy I'm going to tell you about actually targets a different kind of self-control. So for the first strategy with breaking bad habits, that type of self-control is called reactive self-control, whereas one I'm about to tell you about for making good habits is proactive self-control. And they actually rely on different neural systems. So proactive self-control is more frontal in your prefrontal cortex, whereas reactive is more towards the back. And the principle here is actually pretty similar. So a study found that having people monitor and try to improve their posture over the course of 2 weeks really improved their self-control over those 2 weeks. So the researchers had people come into the lab, do a self-control test where they had to squeeze really hard with their hands on something for a long time, and then try not to think of a white bear, and then squeeze the thing again. And so the amount of time they spent squeezing really hard and tiring themselves out was used as a measure of self-control, and it's been used in a ton of studies and is a really good measure. That's not just muscle strength or anything like that. And then they had people do this monitoring and improving posture practice over the course of 2 weeks, came back into the lab, and the people who had to monitor and improve their posture had an improvement in self-control, both with not thinking of the white bear and also the squeezing task. And the key here is that they found that people had to put in effort. So it was only the people who put in high effort and really tried to practice maintaining good posture who got these self-control gains. And again, we see that practicing self-control on something that's pretty benign and not actually very important to people, like, you know, it's nice to have good posture, but no one's gonna like cry if they fail at keeping their shoulders straight. Doing this benign self-control practice helped improve their ability to have self-control later. So let's say you want to develop a workout habit. You've really been trying to get into lifting or running most days a week or something like that, speaking from experience, for years, but you haven't been able to get yourself to have the self-discipline and self-control needed to really stick to that workout schedule. Well, what you could do is start with some easier behaviors. So why not try drinking 8 glasses of water a day for 2 weeks and then see if you have enough self-control to start a small workout routine. Or you could do something like, let's say you're trying to eat healthy, go whole foods plant-based, go vegan, but it's too hard to actually make that shift and have enough self-discipline to do that. Well, you could start by just adding 1 salad a day or even 3 salads a week and just having a small amount of self-control needed to just eat a salad once a day and gradually grow that self-control ability to be able to eventually do the big diet shift that you've been trying to do. If you're trying to work more hours or get into a good routine, you could start by trying a time block schedule and trying to stick to at least a few time blocks per day and just keep increasing. And I'm saying small behaviors that are relevant to the topic of the big behavior because I feel like that'll be more helpful in training for that specific behavior, but really it could be you drink more water in order to be more productive. Like these studies suggest that any practice, even on a totally irrelevant task, can transfer to a different task that requires self-control. So it doesn't even have to be in the same domain. And for choosing your specific practice tasks for both the strategies I've talked about, I think it's important to land in the middle between too easy and too hard. So if it's too easy, it doesn't really take self-control. Like let's say, I'm gonna get out of bed before noon every day. Well, that's not very difficult for me because I get out of bed at 8, so it's not gonna take any self-control. But if it's too hard, like I'm gonna go for a 3-hour walk every morning, I'm just gonna fail so much it's not gonna have an effect. So I suggest choosing something low stakes where you won't be super upset if you don't do it, but you'll still be motivated enough to do it because you know it'll be improving your self-control, and not too easy or too hard. So a little bit of failure is good, but not too much failure. So again, we can look to weightlifting actually, which is very useful, is you want to choose a weight that's hard enough that it's an actual workout, but not so hard that you're not able to lift it much. Like you're not going for 1 rep maxes here, you're going for mix of hypertrophy and strength for my fitness friends out there. And these principles I'm telling you about are probably why a lot of people have good habit snowballs. So I'm sure a lot of you have a friend or have heard about people who started going to the gym and then they suddenly got way better at work and then they started eating super healthy and then they quit alcohol and they started a business on the side and it just kind of snowballs with all these good habits and suddenly they're like on top of the world when they started not so good. And a big reason for this is that your self-control capacity increases. So once they got to the gym, they started growing their self-control and they were able to apply that self-control to other things. And another factor involved there is the fact that once you get into a habit with one thing that used to take self-control, like going to the gym, it actually doesn't really take self-control anymore once it's really ingrained as a habit and a routine. So if you go to the gym every day at 5 a.m., it sucks at first and requires tons of self-control, but once you've been doing that for a month, you don't even really need to think about it anymore. And now you have this increased self-control capacity from working it out so much when first getting into that habit, and now you have a bunch of leftover self-control you no longer even need to spend on going to the gym. So it's a win-win, and then you can spend that on the next habit you want to implement or break. And I think the reason that occasionally the typical military style suck it up approach to self-discipline does work for some people is that if they're able to white knuckle it through that early part, they can grow their self-control from doing the crazy like 70 hard or whatever those weird numbered day programs are where you have to do like everything. Like for the people who do actually make it through, for the rare few who do make it through that initial sucky period of having to change everything at once and having crazy amounts of self-control, they probably did grow their self-control for that. But I think for the vast majority of people that doesn't work. And what will work for many more people is this type of strategy I'm telling you about, of choosing something that is not going to absolutely destroy your self-efficacy if you fail, because if you fail to crack your knuckles a few times, it doesn't really matter that much. But if you succeed, then you end up with extra self-control to spend on other stuff and continue growing it, and you get to see your self-efficacy and your self-discipline grow, and that's gonna work much better. Whereas if you immediately try to stop impulsive eating and you fail, you're much more likely to feel like crap about yourself, have low self-efficacy, and binge. There are studies showing that. So strongly suggest starting with a more gentle approach that works with our brains instead of against them. And now I need your help collecting some data. I would love to hear your ideas for different types of behaviors you might target for practice. So what kinds of things you might try to practice stopping doing, and what types of things you might try to practice doing to work your way up to a big behavior. So I'd love to hear what kinds of things you're thinking about in your life, because then it helps me choose more relevant studies and make more relevant videos to help you. And now for random Mish thought time. There's a comment I've been getting like once a week or once every other week that simultaneously makes me happy and just reminds me that I have no idea what's going on when it comes to social media, kind of by choice. But I get the comment really often that the algorithm must hate my channel, or like it's criminally underrated because people say they really love my content and they have no idea why the algorithm like never shows anyone it, until recently, I guess. Sorry, the light is going crazy in here because the wind is blowing the trees a bunch, and so the light's just going like that. But I do want to say thank you to all of you who share my videos and help us defeat the algorithm's arbitrary hatred of non-sensationalized science so that other people can see these videos. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it every time. And for comments and likes and all of that stuff that helps the robot hate me a little less. I actually have a study I found this morning on that note about how algorithms actually affect our brains. So a study looked at social media with algorithm versus not algorithm or someone else's algorithm, and our brains actually respond differently depending on if it's like personally tailored algorithm versus not. So that I thought was pretty crazy, and I might share that in a video. Let me know if you might be interested, because I find social media's effects on us really fascinating and terrifying at the same time. And I want to talk about it more here, but also it's only kind of tangentially related to mental health and wellness. So let me know if you might be interested in that. Anyway, that's my spiel. If you want to help turn these episodes into podcasts by helping me get audio equipment, please head on over to my GoFundMe. And if you like this video, please like and share. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay up to date on all this cool science stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.